What's going on, everyone? Sprout here, and welcome back to the channel. In my last video, I walked you through the full build of my dream small form factor PC, featuring a Ryzen 9 9950X3D and an RTX 5090, all crammed into the FormD T1. But now it's time to answer the big question. How does it actually perform? This video is all about benchmarks. I've spent a lot of time dialing in my system, experimenting with power limits, curve optimizer settings, and GPU tuning. I am by no means an expert when it comes to undervolting or overclocking, but I wanted to find that perfect balance of thermals, power draw, and performance, especially in such a compact build. Throughout this video, I'll show you the results from Cinebench, 3D Mark, Geekbench, and several games including Cyberpunk, Warzone, and Black Myth Wukong. Whether you're building something similar, curious about thermals in a tight case, or just want to see what this beast can do, this is where it gets real. And just so we're clear, every single test was done with an ambient temperature of around 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 degrees Celsius to keep things consistent. Let's kick things off with some Cinebench scores to see how different CPU tunings affect raw performance and temps. My goal here wasn't to break any records, but to find a sweet spot that gives me a close to stock performance while reducing thermals and overall power draw. First up was a completely stock run, no tuning, just default BIOS settings. That gave me a baseline score of 40,374 with a max CPU temp of 89.6 degrees and an average core clock of around 4,615.2 MHz. Then I set the power limit to 150 watts. As expected, performance dropped slightly, giving me a score of 36,077. But CPU temps also improved, coming in at 76.8 degrees, with an average core clock of 4,354.7 MHz. Next, I added a -30 all-core curve optimizer offset on top of that 150 watt power limit, and the score bounced back up to 39,091, showing that undervolting can help recover lost performance while still keeping things cool. CPU temps came in lower than stock at 76.4 degrees, and average clock speeds climbed a bit too, around 4,557.5 MHz. Finally, I pushed the power limit up to 165 watts while keeping the -30 curve optimizer offset, which got me a score just above stock at 40,510, with a max CPU temp of 83.6 degrees. That's the profile I chose to stick with for the rest of the benchmarks. They offer the best balance between thermals and performance in this case. With that tuning dialed in and stable, it was time to throw some synthetic benchmarks at the full system. Let's take a look at how it did in 3D Mark. First up in 3D Mark was the Time Spy benchmark, which focuses on DirectX 12 performance and really puts both the CPU and GPU through their paces. With my tuned settings, the system pulled a graphics score of 35,461 and a CPU score of 15,079. GPU temps peaked at 76 degrees Celsius and CPU temps topped out at 70 degrees, showing that thermals stayed totally manageable under load. After that, I ran the CPU profile test, which measures performance across multiple thread counts. Really useful to see how the CPU scales. The single thread score came in at 1280, and two threads landed at 2528. As the thread count increased, performance scaled as expected. 4,931 at 4 threads, 9,206 at 8, 15,660 at 16, and topping out at 17,118 at all threads active. And finally, I ran Speedway, 3D Mark's latest test for ray tracing and next-gen rendering techniques. This one is extremely GPU heavy, and the system came in with a score of 12,389 and an average frame rate of 124 FPS. It's a synthetic test, yeah, but the results here give a solid baseline for what kind of gaming and creative performance you can expect from this setup. Next up, I ran Geekbench 6 to get a quick snapshot of both CPU and GPU performance using shorter, real-world style workloads. This one isn't quite as intense as Cinebench or 3D Mark, but it does give a nice overview of general system responsiveness and compute capability. For the CPU test, my 9950X3D pulled a single core score of 3,396 and a multi-core score of 22,238, which lines up really well with what I saw on Cinebench. That strong single core number is great for everyday tasks and gaming performance. Then there's the GPU compute test. With the RTX 5090 tuned and locked at 2800 MHz on the core and 2000 on the memory, it scored an impressive 339,730. While not as flashy as the 3D Mark runs, this result confirms that the GPU is performing well across a variety of workloads, not just games. Now, I know what most of you are here for, real-world gaming benchmarks. So let's start with something brutal, Cyberpunk 2077. I ran 2 tests here. First, the built-in benchmark using the Ray Tracing Overdrive preset at native 4K with the DLSS enabled. No frame generation, just raw performance. With those settings, the benchmark averaged 85 frames per second, which is seriously impressive considering how demanding this game is, especially with full ray tracing cranked. The 1% lows dipped just a bit to 68 frames per second, but overall it was smooth and visually stunning. Then I wanted to simulate more of a long-term gameplay load, so I found a dense, highly reflective spot in the city. Yes, the one with the floating fish. And left the game running there for an hour while logging stats and hardware info. Over that 60-minute session, the average FPS actually ticked up to around 88, likely due to the scene being a bit less hectic than the benchmark run. GPU temps peaked at 72 degrees and CPU temps hit 78 degrees, both which are solid considering the system was under load for that long in a small form factor case. This test helped confirm that not only can the 5090 handle Cyberpunk at max settings, but the overall thermals are under control, even with extended play sessions. Next up, I ran the Black Myth Wukong benchmark. Even though I don't own the full version of the game, the developers included a standalone benchmark tool that gives us a pretty good idea of what to expect performance-wise. I cranked everything up to the highest settings at 1440p to really see what the system could do. On average, I was getting around 86 frames per second, with 1% lows hovering around 72. This was without any DLSS or frame generation enabled, just raw rasterized and ray traced performance. The GPU peaked at around 69 degrees Celsius, while the CPU maxed out at 74, which I was more than happy with given how visually demanding this benchmark is. What really impressed me is how stable the performance was throughout the entire run. No major stutters, no dips below that 1% mark, and no thermal throttling at all. That just goes to show that the tuning paid off, especially in a compact case like the FormD T1. To wrap things up, I had to include at least one competitive title, and I chose Call of Duty Warzone. This is a game where high frame rates and low latency can make a real difference, so I used the optimized settings from FPS Hub, which are all about squeezing out every bit of performance without tanking visual clarity. Rather than running just a short test, I played for several hours while logging the data to get a more accurate picture of a real-world performance. On average, I was hitting around 250 FPS, with 1% lows dropping to about 184. Temps were well under control the entire time. GPU maxed out at 70 degrees Celsius, and CPU temps peaked at around 72, which is really impressive for such a demanding title in a long play session. And that wraps up the full performance breakdown of my dream SFF build. From Cinebench to Cyberpunk, this system really impressed me, especially considering the thermal constraints of the FormD T1. With the right tuning on both the CPU and GPU, I was able to keep temps in check while still pulling off some serious numbers. Now, I didn't have a great way to record decibel readings during the benchmarks, but I can say with confidence, even at full load, this thing is whisper quiet. The fan's barely ramped up, and without headphones, you'd probably forget it's even running. If you have any further questions at all, whether it's about tuning, temps, airflow, or even the editing side of things, drop them in the comments down below. I respond to literally every single one, and I'm more than happy to help however I can. And just one more heads up, I've got a custom part arriving soon that should make the system run even cooler and more efficient. I'm really excited to test it out and share the results in an upcoming video. If you enjoyed this one, hit that like button and consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. Thanks again for watching. This is Sprout, signing off. Catch you in the next one.